I'd choose a lazy person to do a hard job, because a lazy person will find an easy way to do it. Programmers are lazy. We hate doing things when other people have already done them for us. And we also hate doing the same thing over and over again. That's why I spent an entire weekend automating a task that only takes 10 minutes. iTmpl allows you to create new projects from templates in seconds, and you can define your own custom templates that can run arbitrary Python code. In this video, I'll show you how to use it and how to create powerful custom templates. When it comes to installation, I recommend using pipx to install iTmpl, since it's primarily a CLI tool. However, if you wanted to, you could also use pip or poetry if you want iTmpl in a virtual environment. Once you have iTmpl installed, you can list the available templates using the iTmpl list command. As you can see here, as of time of filming, there are two templates baked in, a poetry project and an MkDocs Material site. We're going to be using both of them today, as well as creating our own custom template later on. As you can see, the poetry project has some extra requirements. So what we can do is we can install these requirements into our virtual environment using iTmpl deps, like so. This has installed poetry and pyml into the virtual environment where iTmpl is installed. In this case, that's the pipx environment that we created earlier. To create a new poetry project, all we have to do now is run the iTmpl new command, selecting the template we want to use and naming our project. Now we just have to fill in a description, the author name, which is me, of course. I'm going to leave the license as the default MIT and the Python version at 3.11. iTmpl will then create a new poetry project and install any dev dependencies and non-dependencies that we want for our project. As you can see, it's created it in a new folder. Inside the My Project directory, you'll see we have a virtual environment, a Python library, a tests directory, and some other files for configuration and tooling. This template includes pre-commit tooling and a tox setup, making it really easy to get started with your new project. However, the other template we saw was the MkDocs Material site. So what if we wanted to add a documentation website to our project? Well, of course, since we have an existing project, we don't want to create a new one and then have to sort of copy the files across. So what we can do is we can cd or change directory into a My Project directory, and from this directory we can use the iTmpl new MkDocs Material site command, and as long as we give it the same name as the directory, it will install the template into the current directory instead of creating a new one. So if I now run this command, you'll see it's going to ask us for an author name, which is again myself, a site URL, which for now I'll just set to the GitHub Pages URL for my YouTube project, and some colors. Now I quite like the default colors, so I'm going to leave them as is. In terms of adding our dependencies, since we've created a project with poetry, I'm going to use the poetry dependency adder for this template, and you'll see that that's now installed. This has generated all the relevant files for us, so now all we need to do is run our MkDocs Material site as you normally would with poetry run mkdocs serve. And you can see that's all working for us. If we take a closer look at one of these files, such as the mkdocs YAML file, you can see that iTmpl has filled in all the information we added earlier, such as the project name, the URL, and the author name. And now we'll get into how this works and how to create your own project template. What we're going to do is we're going to create a template for a Fast API project. If you don't know what Fast API is, it's a Python library for creating web servers, and it's really good, so I'd recommend having a look at it. But for now, what we need to do is we need to know where we need to create this template. In order to do that, we can look at our iTmpl config. To see your iTmpl config, just run iTmpl config show. You can see that there's one config option called extra templates directory, and currently this is set to this path on my computer. You can also change this option using the iTmpl config set command. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new directory in this one called templates and set my extra templates directory to this new templates directory so that you can see what I'm doing. Now, if I do iTmpl config show, you can see that my extra templates directory has been set. If you want to reset at any point, you can do iTmpl config reset. In order to get started, what we need to do is make a new directory for our template. So in this case, we'll just make a Fast API project directory. Essentially, how iTmpl works is it uses the Ginger Python library for templating. Ginger is a fantastic templating tool that's used in lots of different places by lots of different projects. So if you want to know more about Ginger, I'll leave a link in the description below. The way Ginger works is you define a template using variables, and then you pass in those variables to a templating function, and Ginger will replace those variables in your files with the value of the variable that you've set. What I'm going to do now is scaffold out a project template without variables. If you'd like to know the process I'm following along, you can check the iTmpl docs site, which will be linked in the description. I've now scaffolded out our basic Fast API project, and we have three main files. We have this main.py file here, which defines defines a very basic FastAPI web server, which returns hello world when you hit the root URL. We also have this Docker file, which will package up our project and serve it on port 8000. This uses the Unicorn web server, which is recommended by FastAPI. Finally, we have this requirements.txt file, which just contains FastAPI all currently. However, we have a few problems with this as it is. What if we want to call our project something other than FastAPI_project? Or what if we wanted to specify a version of FastAPI so that we can pin our versions for good practice? Or what if we wanted to change the text that the root path responds with? Hello world is great in most cases, but it might not always be what you want. We're also currently stuck on port 8000, which isn't ideal either. If you're creating lots of projects, you'll probably want them to run on different ports so that you don't have conflicts. Well, we can do this using iTempl's powerful metadata, variable, and custom Python systems. There are two main config files we'll want for this, a TOML file and a Python file. Let's start with the TOML file. This is an example of the iTempl TOML file. You'll notice it's called .iTempl.toml, and it has to be named this and placed in the root of your template. There are two sections here. We have the metadata section and the variables section. The metadata section only has a few config options. For example, we're using the template description config option here to set the template description. This is what will show up in iTempl list, but you can also set the template requirements here if there are any additional requirements that you need to add with your project. The variables section is a bit more free-flowing. It essentially acts as a Python dictionary, so you can define any templating variables you want here. In this case, I'm defining a root path response variable. Now that we have this, we can update our main.py file. I'm going to replace this hello world with a ginger variable containing our root path response. Now, when iTempl runs, this will be replaced with what we've defined in the iTempl TOML file. So we can change what we've defined here to be something a bit more interesting, like so. The iTempl TOML file is great when you have things that you don't want to change often, but you may want to change. If you want to take user input for things, this is where you will need the iTempl Python file. And this is where we're going to ask our user to input the port number they want the server to run on. We'll also use this Python file to template the FastAPI version. What it'll do is it'll check for the latest FastAPI version and pin our version to that. That way, when you set up a new project, you'll be on the latest version of FastAPI, but going forwards, your version will be pinned, which is a good thing to do. So how do we do this? Well, surprise, surprise, you'll need to create a .iTempl.py file. In this file, you can define two functions. Both are very similar and return ginger templating variables. iTempl will template your project twice, once before copying it into the final destination and once after. This is so, like you saw earlier, we can install dependencies if we need to. The first function that runs is called getVariables, and it takes in a project name, a path to the destination directory, and any existing variables so far. Since this Python file runs within iTempl, you can use any libraries that iTempl currently uses, such as typer, which is what we'll use here for our getVariables function. As you can see, I've imported a couple of things from pathlib and typing just for our type hints, but basically all this function is doing is asking the user for the port they want the server to run on, and then returning a dictionary with that templated variable. Now what we can do is we can go back into our Docker file and template the port. Now when a new FastAPI project is created, the user will be prompted for their port, and then it will be inserted, as I will demonstrate later. The second function is called PostScript, and we're going to use this to determine the latest version of FastAPI, and then set that in our requirements file. In order to do this, we're going to call pip on the user's machine and use the pip index command to find the latest version. Note, however, that the pip index command is experimental, so this might not always work. Here is our PostScript function doing what I just said using the subprocess module to call pip. Essentially, this is calling pip index versions FastAPI, which gives us this output. All this is doing is taking the first line of standard out and just grabbing the version number from that and returning it as a FastAPI version variable. Once again, we can now use this in our requirements.txt file. And now this will be inserted at the end of project creation. Finally, we also want to make sure our project name is templated. iTempl provides some default variables here, such as the current year, current time, project name, and project title. In this case, we only need to use the project name, but we're going to need to use it in a few places. Firstly, we'll use it in the Docker file, and secondly, we'll use it on the directory containing our Python module. iTempl does work on directory names, so we can rename our FastAPI_project directory like so. And that should be everything complete. We can test that our FastAPI project is showing up correctly using iTempl list. And there you go. Our FastAPI project is there, with the description we set earlier. Again, we didn't set any requirements for this because it's not installing our dependencies for us. But if you wanted to do that, you could first set the requirements for poetry if you wanted to do it that way, and then use subprocess to call poetry to install the requirements in the PostScript function. So let's test that our new template works. Let's create a My Fast API project in my filming directory. As you can see, it's asking us for the port we want the server to run on. Just to be a little bit different, let's do it on port 7000. And now it's created our Fast API project. Let's check it out. As you can see, the directory name has been successfully templated. The root response in main.py says hello YouTube. Our Docker file has the correct port, and our requirements file has the latest version. You'll notice that the .iTmpl.py and .iTmpl.toml files are no longer here. That is because iTmpl will remove any file prefixed with .iTmpl. This means you can include other files in here, such as dev requirements or docs requirements, and they will get deleted afterwards once the requirements have been installed, if you choose to do that. So hopefully you've seen that iTmpl is a powerful tool that can reduce work and human error in creating new projects, and it will allow you to be lazy to the absolute maximum. All the code from this video is available on GitHub, and if you'd like to contribute to iTmpl with new templates, I highly encourage you doing so. If you find it useful, someone else will too. Let me know your opinion on iTmpl in the comments, and since you're still here, why not like and subscribe as well? Also, check out this video on the basics of Typer, which is the underlying Python package I used to create iTmpl.